Okay, I think it has started. All right. So welcome, everyone. We're going to continue our investigation of various factors in our mind once we do a little preliminary stuff, starting with some prayers. So, Jana, if you're okay with leading the prayers again tonight, let me get those on the screen and take it away.
Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, 3 times in English. To the founder,
The endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Siddhartha, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go by refuge.
to the
Founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
to the founder,
The endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
short mandala offering once in Tibetan. Sajipo ki Junshin Medita Tramri Rabling Shi Nidegya Adi Sangye Shintu Me Refuge in bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, and grace. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodan Sokji Chognamla, Janchu Bardu Dagni Kyab Suchi, Daji Chonyen Gepe Sonamji, Drola Pencher Sangye Drupar Sho, Sangye Chodan Soki Chognamla, Janchu Bardu Dagni Kyab Suchi, Daji Chonyen Gepe Sonamji, Drola Pencher Sangye Drupar Sho.
Great, thank you, Jana, for leading the prayers. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation then before we begin the class. Just find a good meditation posture, one where the back is somewhat upright, straight, but relaxing into this as best as you can. You might keep the eyelids a bit open, especially since it's evening and we tend to be a little sleepier at this time of day. And if you prefer to keep the eyes closed, that's fine. So we're going to start with just a few minutes of watching the breath. And if you have a technique you already use with the breath, feel free to do that. If you need a suggestion, then I generally suggest tuning into the sensation around the nostrils, that very subtle sensation that occurs as you breathe in and out through the nose. Try to keep your awareness there as best as you can, but when you see that the mind wanders, has gotten involved in various thoughts, uh, objects that we're maybe attracted to and thinking about, or problems, difficulties going on in our lives, whatever the case might be. When we see that that's happened, let go of whatever distracted you and guide the mind back to the breath. So I'll ring the chime here in the Ngompa to start the meditation. We'll just do a couple of minutes in silence on the breath, and then I'll leave you in a short reflection to set motivation for tonight. So now to set our motivation, we can recall from the last session, we were talking about our conceptual mind. Our conceptual mind is certainly the problem in regard to the wrong ideas that we have, these wrong views. The Buddha says that all of our difficulty, all of our suffering comes from distorted views, from looking at things in an inaccurate way, not really seeing how things actually exist. And we'll look at that in more detail, but the idea that we want to entertain right now in setting our motivation is to understand that the conceptual mind also is the domain of the virtuous, wholesome conceptions that we can have, the things that will lead us to achieving our greatest potential. Minds like compassion, loving kindness, patience, wisdom. All of these minds can be developed first in a conceptual state and eventually even transcend conception, where we can know things in a very direct way and free the mind of everything that is distorted. All those wrong conceptions can be completely removed through generating proper conceptions. And eventually, overcoming those mistaken conceptions completely. So we discussed this a bit last week, but this is the idea that informs setting our motivation for being here. If we couldn't change our minds, if we couldn't actually know freedom from these distortions, then there wouldn't be much point to Buddhist practice. But because we can, through the force of our thoughts, our awareness, we can change our minds and therefore change our reality. It's important that we engage in these teachings with the goal of trying to accomplish the greatest welfare, not just our own freedom from those distortions, not just our own fulfillment of our deepest potential, but for the sake of all sentient beings who are just like us, having these distorted views, continuing to experience difficulty, but having the potential to be free from all of that. So set this motivation that we call bodhicitta, this mind that strives to awaken, to do this work of removing what is negative, enhancing and developing what is positive to an infinite degree, so that we then can achieve the state of a Buddha, the same state that the Buddha himself attained. And then we can help all beings perfectly, leading them to attain enlightenment as well. And then you can open your eyes slowly, and we'll begin tonight's class. Okay, so thanks for joining again tonight. So those of you who haven't been at this series, it is a series that we're doing, but every session is going to have its own kind of theme or what we're working with. And so tonight we're going to continue with our investigation of what are called these mental factors. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that to begin with. But the whole point of this course once more is so that we get to know our minds and what the contents of our minds are. So last week we did talk a little bit about what we call these sort of main minds. We have 6 main minds. Let me actually go ahead and put this on the screen just to refresh our memory from last week's slides that I shared. These 6 minds are the 5 sense consciousnesses. We know that we have a consciousness, our eye consciousness, that is able to interact with visual form, color and shape and so on. Our ear consciousness, which hears sounds, our nose consciousness involved with smells, odors, and then our tongue with taste, and body consciousness with tactile sensations. And remember how I talked about last week as well, those sense consciousnesses are simply receiving raw data. They aren't intelligent consciousnesses, in other words. They're simply portals for us to be able to receive data from our world. And that gets organized into various concepts by the mental consciousness, in particular, the conceptual mental consciousness. And remember that this kind of uses an idea of things. It's not knowing things directly. It's kind of got this medium through which it's knowing phenomena. Things come in through our eyes, for example, colors and shapes and so on. And then they become an idea of that we work with in our conceptual mind, saying, oh, that's a really lovely blue, or that blue's hideous. I would never paint my house that color or something. We go through this kind of judgment and dividing things up and what have you. And of course, this is, as we're going to be examining in the afflictions when we get into them starting tonight, this is how we get into trouble, is we're often saying something is worth more and is more valuable than other things. And we end up having attachment for those things that we consider more valuable and useful, and an aversion towards those things that we don't like and want to kind of remove from our experience. So this is, again, something we're going to see is the conceptual mind is playing these games and working with our reality in a distorted way. The other element of our mental consciousness we're just touching on briefly, it's a non-conceptual mental consciousness that actually is capable of perceiving objects directly, but they say this is really something in terms of the main one we're trying to develop, that we have to get really deep meditation to be able to do that, to be able to have a direct perception of something. But this idea of kind of our 5 sense consciousnesses kind of bringing in the raw data, our mental consciousness, particular conceptual mind, sort of working with it, being the processor, analyzing it, putting it all together into a picture of our reality. Again, sometimes we can know things quite accurately and clearly, but a lot of the times we're not knowing things that way at all. And we're distorting how they exist conventionally, and we're distorting how they exist at a deeper level. These are the things we're going to be exploring. So what we've been going into then, and just began our investigation of in the last session, was what are called the 51 mental factors. Let me give you just a taste once more from last week's slides about what these mental factors are. These mental factors are divided into 6 groups, and the mental factors are kind of involved with some functionality of the mind. Again, don't think of these things as being kind of concrete, separate units or whatever. They are often arising together. And we went through the 5 ever-present or omnipresent ones, and I'll review those in a moment. Tonight, we're also going to move on to the 5 focusing or object ascertaining mental factors. These 2 are more the mechanics of the mind, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because it's good to know that that's what's happening. But the real contents of our mind, the things we want to focus on, are the remaining ones, especially the next 3. And we're going to actually jump to the root afflictions after we go through these first 2 categories tonight. So just so you know, we do have this free book that's available through the Drive in a PDF file that you can access. And this whole section on the 51 mental factors is covered in those pages. But essentially, yeah, we're starting to look at the beginning of all of this. These first 5 are kind of, again, the mechanics of the mind. They're sort of there in every moment of our awareness. They arise with all of these sense consciousnesses as well as our mental consciousness. And let me just go through a brief description of them based on the slides. Last time I talked about them kind of free form, but I didn't have time to go into the slides. So let me go ahead and go through those. First, I want to just introduce them through a book by Geshe Tashi Sering called Buddhist Psychology. He says, whether the mind is present for a long time or even the briefest moment, these 5 mental factors are always involved. Some scholars use the term units in reference to these phenomena. The main mind, again, one of those 6, either sense consciousness or mental consciousness, the main mind plus the always present mental factors compose a unit of mind, just kind of a single little individual moment of mind. Without any one of these 5 mental factors, a unit of mind could not function fully. Again, this is a bit of a strange way. I remember when I first started studying this sort of stuff, I'm like going, what is the relevance of all of this? But it's really kind of looking at what is happening functionally in each moment of mind, because we are always knowing something. Again, we define mind, which includes all of this in a sense, not just the main minds, but the mental factors even. Anything we consider as mind, consciousness, awareness, as that which is clear, meaning it has no materiality. Mind is not the brain in Buddhism, right? We talked about that previously. It also has the function of knowing. And what is knowing? To know things means to bring them into your field of experience. Mind is in the nature of experience. This is how we know our world and know ideas and whatever it is that we want to, contemplate. So this is kind of getting at how is it that the mind is actually functioning in that moment to bring that information in and for us to be able to engage in some sort of knowledge of it. That knowledge, again, could be quite distorted. That knowledge could be very accurate and depends upon our own minds. So that's the kind of the idea behind this. We'll jump back in to these 5 where they're described in more detail. The first one, I know that this word in English, intention, seems to like it's a thought, right? Well, what is your intention for being here? Oh, I wanted to get this or I wanted to do that. That's not what we mean by intention here. It's not, because this can be with our non-conceptual minds. This can be with our sense consciousnesses, right? Intention moves the main mind, the primary consciousness, and its accompanying mental factors to the object. It's just kind of like mental energy that causes us to move in a particular direction. It is the conscious and automatic motivating element that causes the mind to involve itself with and apprehend its object. It is action, karma. This is an interesting point about intention. Intention in the mental factor is how we actually create karma. And we'll talk about karma throughout this course. It's not mainly on karma, but karma is an element we need to be involved in some understanding of. Karma is created whenever our mind moves, which is pretty much every second, right? We are constantly going to this, going to that, whatever. A lot of the karma we create is pretty neutral, because this mental factor by itself is neutral. But we often bring along for the ride things that are going to flavor that karma, to be virtuous or non-virtuous. So we'll talk about this more. As it says there, although the mental factor of intention itself is not either constructive, destructive, or neutral, in other words, virtuous, non-virtuous, or neutral, it becomes so depending upon what other mental factors, such as attachment or anger, accompany that mental state. Hopefully we'll have time tonight to begin our investigation of this mental factor called attachment. Attachment is a form of desire that we have that can be non-virtuous in its nature. So intention is kind of this force that causes the mind to go in various directions. And we see something pretty in the store and immediately our intention, engages that object, kind of brings that object into our field of focus. The next factor kind of holds the mind there so that we can then relate to the object and begin to, of course, have more involvement with it. This one's called attention, which can also be referred to as mental engagement. It functions to direct the main mind. Again, they use the term primary consciousness. This is from a book by the Dalai Lama and Venerable Chodron. And along with the main mind, it's concomitant mental factors, the mental factors that are arising with it. It brings them to the object and to actually apprehend the object, kind of in a sense, be more attentive to it. It focuses and holds the mind on an object without allowing it to move elsewhere. We have, sometimes our attention is not so focused, right? If you walk into a room or a store or something and you just kind of have this broad sort of array of things that's appearing to you. And then, immediately this begins to be your object of focus and you engage more in it. Oh, there's that thing that I heard about that's at the store, that, new type of cereal or whatever that I want to get. I mean, whatever it is, it'll draw your mind in. Suddenly you've got an attention factor that causes you to hold on to it for a little bit more than just a passing glimpse of it. You're going to have a very mild attention when it's just something that you're not paying any direct kind of focus on or what have you. But any time that we are involved with objects around us, there's some element of attention. It becomes more powerful the more we attend to that object. And of course, that's involved in inducing some sort of experience of the object. And that's what we move into next. The third of these five is what's called contact. And contact makes it sound like it's something physical. We do have physical contact with many things through our sense consciousnesses. Contact is the coming together of these three things that are mentioned. The object, such as the color blue, for example, that's on the screen right now. The cognitive faculty, which is the ability for our eye organ to have that sensory perception of color, and in this example, and the main mind, the primary consciousness, which would be, in this case, your eye consciousness. So when those come together so that you have that colored blue, your ability through your eye organ to discern that color, and then the primary consciousness of your eye consciousness that is perceiving that blue, that acts as a basis for feelings. And by feelings, we don't mean the whole range of, emotions that we talk about in Western psychology and what have you. Feeling is the next mental factor we're going to talk about. You have three different feeling tones or feeling sensations. One is pleasurable, one is painful, and one is neutral or indifferent. Contact is the cause of those feelings. So what happens is, when you're looking at, like when you were looking at that blue on the screen, some feeling is arising. Maybe it was quite neutral because it's not a color that's really engaging you in a pleasant or unpleasant way. Or some of you may have had an unpleasant experience or a pleasant experience, but we certainly know when we have those sorts of things that register as pleasant or unpleasant. Like go to the restaurant and get a food that you really enjoy and they put it on your tongue. And as soon as that contact happens in terms of the object coming together with your ability for your tongue to know taste sensations, and then your taste consciousness being generated, that you have a pleasant experience. You enjoy that meal. Or maybe you go to a restaurant and you have the opposite. They serve you something that's like, oh, what happened to these vegetables? They're horrible. These fresh? You have this different experience, right? Contact is the way that we have those feelings of experience, or experiences of feeling, sorry. Feelings, we just mean a feeling tone. What happens on the basis of that feeling tone is a whole other story. We're going to get into that tonight and start to get into that For example, attachment arises when we have pleasant sensations that we want to keep going and we don't want to be separated from. That's, again, something we're going to explore a little bit more later. But this is really just happening at the raw level in terms of that experience. You come into contact with that object because your intention moved you in towards it. Your attention is focused on it. You have the contact with it, whether it be visual, auditory, what have you. And then the feeling arises. And again, by feeling, we're just talking about a feeling tone, a feeling sensation. Let's look at how that's described. It's simply an experience of pleasure, pain, or neutrality. Feeling experiences the results of our past actions and can lead to reactions of attachment, anger, confusion, and so forth. Essentially, when we talk about karma that we were alluding to earlier, intention is how we create karma. Karma ripens into certainly various situations, but it's primarily to give us certain experiences. We often talk about how, you have the karma to have good things in your life. Well, that means that all those things that you enjoy, that, the delicious food and the beautiful home and whatever it is that you have in your life, all of those are a product of your own past actions, and they are inducing pleasant feelings for you. Virtuous actions induce pleasant feelings. Non-virtuous actions or karma induce unpleasant feelings. And then neutral actions induce neutral feelings. We rarely talk about the neutral ones, but this is how everything is happening. So those feelings are simply feeling tones that are arising on the basis of something in the past with regard to something we're experiencing in the present that we're coming into contact with. Again, I'm just doing a cursory explanation of this, and it's not as important as the real content of our minds on the basis of these feelings, but it is good to understand that mechanics and what's happening. I had a little mindfulness exercise that I encourage you to spend some time with over the past week. The last of these first 5 that are always there in every moment of mine is what we often call discrimination. Other terms for this is recognition, discernment. It makes it sound too like it's conceptual, like I'm discriminating this from that and what have you. But we even do this at a non-conceptual level. It functions to simply distinguish it is this and not that, and to apprehend the characteristics of an object. It kind of differentiates things and identifies objects. So when we have a field of experience, once more, you're like going back into a store and you have all these things appearing. What allows you to focus in on that one in particular and to engage in it in more detail is that you're discriminating it as different from the other objects that are surrounding it. And that's happening through your visual consciousness, just simply saying, oh, there's that package or whatever, different from that. You're not thinking that. You're just simply able to discern some differentiation. And then on the basis of that, once more, we do further differentiation by thinking, oh, this is good, this is bad, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, and so on. So there are thought processes that get involved in this, but the discrimination at the very raw level is simply the ability to discern this from that. It's happening all the time. Like discerning, my voice from the sound of the fan there, because there still is a small heater on over there. You again, just making some discrimination in terms of what your ear consciousness right now is attending to. And, that's what you want to attend to and not attend to the sound of the fan or what have you. All right. Those 5 are, again, working all the time with regard to every moment of our conscious awareness. If we consider it, Geshe Tashi says, it's fairly easy to understand why there can be no mind without those 5. For mind, which is subjective to be present, there must be an object, right? That's the first part of it. You always have some sort of object that is present. Even in your dreams, you have a dream object that is there in your awareness. So that's kind of one part of the equation. But these 5, he's going to spell out how they play a role. First, there must also be contact between the mind and its object in some way. That object has to be brought into our field of experience. Again, being known by whatever mental power that we're talking about, or sense power through our eyes, ears, what have you. If there's no discernment, kind of differentiating this from that, there's nothing about the object that the mind can apprehend. If it was all just a sea of nothing that we could never discriminate all the things in the grocery store, you wouldn't be able to choose, oh, I want this and I don't want that, right? So we need kind of this discrimination or discernment that allows us to differentiate what is in our field of awareness. And if there's no feeling, there can be no actual experience of the object, right? Because you haven't gotten to know the nature of that object through discerning what it brings you. It brings you pleasure, it brings you pain, it brings you neutrality. So in this case, how can there be a mind that knows the object if you never experience it? You have to have some feeling that is arising on the basis of it. A lot of the time we do have neutral feeling, I think, but we tend to vacillate towards the pleasant feelings and try to avoid the unpleasant ones, right? This is our sort of default mode. But even this understanding that we've just talked about reflects a very basic level of operation. So to move beyond that, we consider intention, which is that movement towards the object that causes us to be more interested in it in a sense, to have that energy that is, again, going to formulate our karma. Finally, without attention, even if all the other factors are present, we could not focus on the object long enough for the mental event to be meaningful. You need to have some sort of attending to the object to formulate an experience of the object that's going to have more impact on your mind. And this happens, and again, I keep using these examples of like getting attracted to sense objects or what have you, but it's happening even with our study and practice and meditation, right? When we attend to a particular object, we become much more engaged in it, and it has a longer lasting effect on our minds. They said if you walk into a room and the attention is just kind of floating from one thing to another and you're never really settling on anything, well, then nothing is registering at a very profound level. But when you actually attend to something, and in that moment of mind, all of that is made much deeper, well, then you can develop really harmful states of mind, but you can also generate very, beneficial states of mind. It all depends upon, again, what we do with our minds. This is the mechanics that's going on all the time.
And so that's even in our dreams, right?
It is even in our dreams, and they even say in subtler states of mind, it's happening in a much subtler way. I think they say there are some moments that become so subtle that they're not differentiated in such a deeper way. But certainly in our dream states, I mean, look at what happens in our dreams. I mean, again, I don't know your dreams. I know my dreams, and I get pretty emotionally involved in some of my dreams sometimes, right? Something that's really, and look at what happens when you have a nightmare. I had one the other night, some weird thing was happening, and all of a sudden I woke up and took me a while to get back to sleep. But you see that in the moment of your having that dream experience, you're, attending to that object, you are involved in it. And then when it does something that is frightful to you or whatever, you're experiencing the unpleasant feeling that is arising, and even might have some anger or fear or aversion, something arising in your mind. Of course, it's just a dream object. It's not in your room, they're threatening you. So again, in dreams, we're having this experience as well of these five playing a role. Kind of again, that mechanics of the mind is probably the best word. I think Geshe Itashi uses another word for these five. So the mindfulness exercise that I was wanting you to engage in was kind of to pay attention to the way that raw data is brought into your awareness by way of the sense consciousnesses generally. I mean, we do have a way for our minds to think of things that are brand new that we can experience, the creative mind and what have you. But the conceptual mind begins to process and work with that data to construct your view of reality. And then have subsequent thoughts about what you're experiencing. Oh, I like that. I don't like this, whatever. I don't know if anyone had to share any experiences they wanted to share on that exercise. Anything from last week? It is interesting when you begin to pay attention to the mind. Remember there was this wonderful quote from, what's his name? Karuna Ketan, who was a student of Lama Yeshe's. He was at one of the retreats that Lama Zopa did, and he was sharing his experiences with the larger group of being with Lama Yeshe, who was the founder of our organization. Anyway, Lama Yeshe was commenting because so many of those early students, they all came to Nepal kind of looking for wild experiences, right? They wanted to do hashish and have all these psychedelic experiences or whatever and have something mystical and magical happen. And Lama Yeshe was telling Karuna, he says, everybody's always looking for magic, but they don't realize the mind is magic. And I that really stuck with me when I heard him do that quote, because it is true. When we start to pay attention to our minds, you start to realize the sort of magic that is going on in there. I mean, we are creating our reality with, to Janice wearing the shirt, with our thoughts, we make the world. With how we are framing our world, that's the world we experience. Yeah. Yes, Beverly.
Is the non-conceptual mind also the intuitive mind, or is that, I'm just trying to get the
Yeah.
definitions.
Yeah, I think the intuitive component, Buddhism doesn't talk about it quite so much, but I would say that it's probably not identical to that part of it, because it is when that intuitive sense arises, it's generally in the form of a thought. It's generally some sort of an impulse for us to attend to some way of, kind of responding to our world or being involved in our world. Where intuition comes from and where it kind of fits into all of this, I've never gotten a satisfactory answer in Buddhism, because it's not one of these mental factors that's laid out in terms of that being something that can be pigeonholed and identified in the mind.
Thank you. So
but-
it's all mechanical, right? So I'm trying to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I certainly believe in intuition, and that we often have some imprints or something that ripens in the moment that gives us some additional information that we can pay attention to. But I think it tends to fall more in the conceptual domain, though we can have maybe more intuitive things that happen that are not so conceptual. That is not really a whole area that, again, Buddhist psychology really works with quite so much. I tried looking for some information on intuition in Buddhism a couple of times when people ask similar questions, and I just never seem to find anything that's that satisfactory. But again, there's different ways of looking at things, and we're not trying to say Western psychology bad, throw it away, Eastern psychology good, keep it. It's just to inform how we work with our minds, and intuition for many of us can be a very important part of what we need to be aware of as well. So, yeah, but thanks for that question about
Thank you.
that. And,
One,
still,
I was listening to a talk by, those monks who did the walk,
yes.
and the main monk was talking, and he said that, there was an accident when one of the
Right.
monks got hit by a truck or something and broke his leg. And he mentioned that, like, that whole, like, couple of hours before that happened, that he was really uneasy,
Interesting.
that he just felt like something didn't feel right.
Could have been
So
what we call intuition. Yeah.
Right, so that, and he said, and then it just kept getting stronger and stronger until he
Yeah.
was just gonna tell them, pull over, everybody get over to the side.
Right. Right.
And that's when the truck hit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so
I mean,
that's kind of like intuition,
So
right?
yeah, if you didn't hear at home what Stella, she was talking about the monks, and one of them who was hit by a truck, that the head monk was saying he was feeling some sense of things not being quite right and wanting to address that. But I think Buddhism does teach that there are certainly, what we call clairvoyances, ways of seeing things or experiencing things that are not in our normal, everyday, ordinary awareness. So there's also that maybe tapping into some of that, and maybe we all have some ability to get, some of those messages through, but it is interesting when it happens. So this idea, again, going back to the other exercise, was just to really pay attention to it in terms of the raw mechanics of what we just discussed. Within the understanding of those that operate in every moment of awareness, try to deconstruct the way that they are functioning when your mind is experiencing various objects, whether through the direct awareness of your sense consciousnesses or the indirect way that your conceptual mental consciousness knows things by way of a mental image. Just kind of pick that apart and say, okay, what's happening right now? We could all use it as an experiment. Is that there is your ear consciousness is being generated because you have the ear, what we call the ear sense power, which is essentially making that ear capable of hearing sounds, and the sound of my voice is appearing to it, right? That's the raw stuff that is happening. The contact with that is in the moment. Every single time that I'm uttering something, it is entering into your ear and being registered by your ear consciousness. You are attending to it by listening to what I'm saying, intention moving in that direction. We can say that it's differentiating it again, having some form of discrimination, discriminating the sounds is something you want to attend to versus, again, other sounds in the room that you aren't. And then also you are having a feeling. I don't know what the feeling is that you're having, hoping it's pleasant, but you're at least, at least in the neutral zone, I hope, if not pleasant, and certainly not in the painful zone. Wouldn't want to be saying anything to you that makes you have a painful experience. But we can just pick that apart with regard to everything we do throughout a day. And it's just to kind of be aware that there's this raw process that's going on. And a lot of the conceptual overlay comes after the fact. When we've had that experience and are attending to it, that then we start having sometimes good thoughts, sometimes not so healthy thoughts. This is where we're going to be going to in terms of these other mental factors that are the wholesome ones, the unwholesome ones, and what have you.
And like sometimes I wonder, are we sometimes getting these like hidden little messages through our whole experience, but we just aren't there to really receive them, like maybe it's happening over and over again and we're just not,
So your question is is it possible that there are things that are out there that are kind of, we're not receiving, we're not attending
Right.
to in some way? I mean, I think there are, but I wouldn't get too hung up on that as much as, again, just saying, that our job, when it comes down to it, I think, I mean, this is just my hypothesis around everything we're working with in this course, is to whatever we are experiencing and whatever level of awareness that we have around that, it's most important to have the internal awareness, to have the understanding of how our minds are working. How are our minds moving in a particular direction that is either healthy and wholesome and leads to positive results, or unhealthy and unwholesome and is going to lead to negative results? Because our minds, again, are the creators of our experience in the moment, in terms of what we've done in the past, ripening into that feeling and what have you. But what we are doing now with that is what's going to create our experiences in the future. So if we attend to things in a much more wholesome way and not get so caught up in these habitual patterns that have been problematic for us, then that's the big job. That's the thing we really need to work on. So whether there's more going on out there than what we're able to receive, well, I mean, we certainly know that there are ranges of sound, for example, that we don't hear, that, Zia will hear because Zia is a dog, and dogs have a way of have registering sounds that, again, are not audible by the human ear. So there are things, certainly, and even with regard to the color spectrum, we are only within a particular spectrum of colors, and there's infrared and what have you, and things that we cannot experience, and they're outside of the range of human ability. So in that way, there certainly are many things that are, but in terms of whether there's other information or things going on, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. But once more, I think whether that's happening in the outside, the most important thing is, are we tending to the inside? Are we really working with our minds in regard to even just the coarser things that we're experiencing? When we eat food, or when we listen to music, or when we do whatever, are we just getting totally caught up in these things and creating patterns that are not going to necessarily be healthy for us? I'm not saying don't enjoy these things. We're going to get to that. When we talk about attachment tonight, hopefully get to it, there's a differentiation between the mind of attachment that craves those pleasant experiences versus just the simple experience of pleasant things. And those can be separate.
how about when like these lamas, these high lamas do mows, for example? I mean, what is
When
that?
lamas do divinations like Mo's and what have you. I mean, again, there can be a clairvoyance that they have that allows them to understand and know things that we don't have access to. They're not in our purview. Again, there's an understanding that can happen, again, depending upon who those beings are. They say Buddhas know every phenomenon of the past, present, and future. So I don't know. I mean, again, this gets into the realm of these things, again, that are outside of the main purpose we really want to focus on here is, regardless of whether these abilities exist out there, what are we doing with our own minds right now? How are we tending to them to make sure that we do what is, again, I don't want to use the word proper, because then it makes it sound like somebody's dictating it to you. What will bring about the results that you seek? What is it that we really want? Maybe that's the first question we always start with. That's what our motivation is intended to be about. What is it we want from our practice of Buddhism? Yeah. to have a more peaceful mind, to be able to help others to be at peace, what have you. Well, that means we have to work with our minds. That means we have to do the inner investigation that's going to allow us to help others to do the work themselves as well. So all these things are interesting questions, Stella. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think I can really answer them adequately, and they're not really the main thing that I want to focus on in this course. These next set of five, actually, what I would like to do to introduce these is go to the text. I'm not going to use the text as much as what I initially thought I might. This is the text. Whoops, sorry, here. This was just the introduction to these 51 mental factors. I won't read these. You'll see that our text goes through each of these five that I just talked about. Feeling. Maybe we just read this one, for example, because this is one of the most important ones. It was one of them that the Buddha singled out when he was talking about the basis for a person, that the aggregate of feeling, as it's often called, is an important part of our human experience. In the Buddhist context, feeling has a more specific meaning than its general connotation of emotional state, as in our ordinary use of the word. Here, feeling refers to the experience of pleasure, pain, or indifference arising when the mind contacts a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral object. So the feeling experience is always in line with the object in terms of our relationship to it. But those things aren't cast in stone, right? Because you can listen to music that you really enjoy and it induces a pleasurable feeling, but someone else might listen to it and find it to be painful. Not music they want to listen to at all, right? Recognition, that's the word he used for discrimination or, differentiation. Again, this idea that it sort of allows you to discern this is this, that is that, what have you. Let's go to these five that, again, are still a part of the kind of mechanics of the mind. Let me leave the list of them on there, but these are called the five focusing mental factors or object ascertaining mental factors. These kind of zero in upon specific characteristics of an object, such as the desirability from the point of view of mental maturation on the spiritual path, which is where we use it in a positive way, and they hold the object with progressively increasing power. They are the mental factors to be employed during study or meditation upon any subject. In general, they accompany almost every moment of consciousness, though they're not omnipresent as the first five were, and they can also be virtuous or non-virtuous in dependence upon whatever object of awareness you have and whatever other associated mental factors, again, kind of come along for the ride. Here, we present those that function when mental consciousness is focusing upon a virtuous object. And that's the case also with the slides I'm going to share from His Holiness and Venerable Chodron. These are presented in a Buddhist view of psychology because they are very important in how we go about improving the quality of our minds. Having an aspiration, kind of an engagement in the object that is going to allow us to move it in a particular direction of aspiring to achieve something, a conviction or belief where we integrate that object more deeply with us, a mindfulness that doesn't allow us to forget the object, a concentration that stays single-pointedly focused on it, and then the knowledge, the wisdom that will arise on the basis of that investigation. So all of these play a big role in our Buddhist practice, but they also play a role in non-virtue arising. Let's look at how they're presented here. Again, this is in the more virtuous aspect, though there is a one little place where he shares some comments on it, on one of them being influenced in a non-virtuous way. Aspiration seeks a virtuous object of study, meditation, or practice with interest and faith, and wishes not to separate from it. Based on faith in a wholesome object, such as an aspect of Buddhist teaching, aspiration associated with its induced enthusiasm is the initial antidote to laziness in our study, meditation, or spiritual practice. Faith is necessary for motivating us toward a virtuous goal that we have not yet experienced, or for meeting again a virtuous object from the past, and most importantly, for maintaining focus on a virtuous object in the present. Aspiration is often singled out as, again, the thing that arises on the basis of faith. So if you have faith, which we're going to talk about as a virtuous mental factor, faith in Buddhism is not the same as blind faith. It's kind of a conviction we develop over time from hearing the Buddha's teachings and thinking about them and meditating on them, investigating them, using them in our daily life. Our faith grows because we have more confidence that what the Buddha taught it works. It's the answer. It's what we can put our money on in a sense. Then on the basis of that faith, we aspire to achieve things, to gain the realizations that the Buddha said we can on the basis of our study and meditation. So aspiration does tend to be a little more conceptually presented in this regard when we start talking about it having a virtuous tone. But again, it can also be functioning simply in our aspiration to want to engage further in even objects that lead us down a non-virtuous path. We'll see that again a little bit later when we look at the remainder of these 5. The second one, which is called here conviction, which again sometimes is phrased as belief. They also, again, he uses the term appreciation or strong resolve. What does this do? It stabilizes the mind, focused on the wholesome object that's found by aspiration. Generated by further study and analysis, conviction fully appreciates the validity and value of the object or goal, and this helps to prevent distraction. So we have this ability for us to engage in the object in a much deeper way through wanting to just not have the aspiration towards it, but a real being convinced that this is an object that we want to investigate in deeper ways and incorporate into our minds. So it keeps us from being distracted to something else and keeps us strengthening our power of being engaged with that object. We keep saying object. I mean, in this case, when we're talking about the Buddha's teachings, we might, for example, use the topic of bodhicitta, which we meditated on at the beginning of tonight, right? Bodhicitta is a thought that we want to generate to become a Buddha for the sake of all beings, informed by our compassion and loving kindness and so on. So this is something, we have an aspiration to achieve. We have a conviction or belief that this is a mind state that will be of great benefit to us and to all beings through our study and investigation of that. So therefore, we then retain a mindfulness of it. That's the third factor that is here when we're actually engaged in an object. Before we go to that, though, this is the place where he talks about, well, no, let's skip that one. There's another comment where he talks about it being a non-virtuous mental factor at times. Oops, sorry. I have to put my thing on the screen there, then I can do the cursor down. Okay. Whoops, went too far down. Where's it going? Okay. There. Sorry.
Excuse me, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but is this breaking down what's actually happening in our mind, like from the first moment that we see something and
Well, the first 5 are going to be always present whenever we have that experience of anything, whether it be in the first moment or the second moment or what have you. The next 5, the ones we're looking at now, are when we are more involved in an object and another process has taken over in a sense. They call it focusing or object ascertaining because it's sort of a heightened awareness of the object, if you will, that is going to cause us to engage in these aspirations for it, some conviction that it has the qualities that we are seeking, some mindfulness, retention of it, not forgetting it, being concentrated and focused on it, and so on. These are the things that we generate around it. And we can apply them to non-virtuous things as well. We're going to primarily look at them tonight in terms of them helping our minds. Because when we have that, we've all generated these things with regard to the Dharma, I'm guessing. Some of you may be relatively new to the Dharma, but all of us have had some taste of the Dharma through our past teachings we've received and meditations we've done, investigation, reading, whatever it is we've engaged in. We had some initial experience of it when we attended to it and what have you, and then we began to have an aspiration to engage in it and some conviction that the Buddhist path is what we want to do and a mindfulness retention of those topics that we are investigating and so on. So it does play a greater role in terms of our, spiritual development.
So this can also have an effect on our meditation, like where we want to go with our meditation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To kind of see the various factors that Stella's question had to do with, does this have an effect on our meditation? Absolutely. Because when we have an awareness and understanding of what is going on, well, then we know where we need to work, And remember that all of this aspiration, the first one, was contingent upon faith. Well, if we don't have any faith in the Buddha's teachings, well, then we'd never aspire to move in that direction, right? We're like, oh, the Buddha teaches some nice things, but it's not really the way, this is the way, or that is the way, or there is no way, whatever it is that you decide is your aspiration. If you have some conviction in the Buddha's teachings from your own investigation and some faith, then you have an aspiration and that belief that allows you to move forward, and all the others fall into place. Yeah. So these five again are a little more active and a little bit different than what we were talking about in terms of the first five. So they're not always there in every moment of mind. I know that Venerable Gyatso in his text, he was saying that they're there a lot of the time, and I think they are. But again, in terms of our practice of virtue, it's going to be there where we want them to particularly be accentuated, particularly brought to our awareness. Mindfulness, if this is a big term in not just Buddhism, but obviously even in the secular world, mindfulness has gotten to be a very sort of key topic. What we mean by mindfulness here, though, is that it is that factor of our minds that holds, in this case, the virtuous object firmly with that conviction and comes into operation. Whoops, I need to move this over just a little bit so it's all on the screen. Into operation by continually recollecting the object. It's three qualities of one, familiarity with the object. You have to have some familiarity with the object to be mindful of it. Two, not forgetting the object, allowing you to retain it and stay with it. And three, remaining undistracted, not moving from the object, are the basis for the next one, concentration. You cannot have concentration without mindfulness. Mindfulness means you are aware and attending to the object and not being driven away from it, and having that ability to hold it and not forget it. That is what arises then, is our concentration on the basis of that mindfulness. So let's go to concentration. Concentration is the perfection of mindfulness. It remains single-pointedly and continuously focused on the virtuous object. It functions as the basis for acquiring knowledge, bringing under control all things in our life. Not yet what we would classify as meditative stabilization, or the Sanskrit word samadhi. It is nonetheless a stability of mind that we have now. All of us have some measure of concentration. You couldn't drive a car if you didn't have concentration, an ability to stay focused single-pointedly on what's going on. Of course, that's why accidents happen, right? Because people are doing their phone while they're trying to drive and, eat food at the same time and drink coffee and whatever. I mean, it's all going on. You have to have an ability to stay single-pointedly focused. So we all know what that factor is in our everyday experience. In our Buddhist practice, it's where our meditation comes into play, where we want to stay with something. Again, the only way we're going to change our minds at a very deep level is retaining an awareness of things, right? Because if you come to a teaching, and we can all go to teachings, every day of the week now, and go online everywhere, all the various places offering teachings here and there, that you can get a lot of that information. But if you aren't retaining it in your mind and incorporating it into your life, it's not going to do much good, right? Because the whole objective of what the Buddha taught, as I'm emphasizing with this course, is to change our minds, is to get us to see what is going on, be very clear about what's happening, what is wholesome and worthy of adopting, and what is unwholesome and we need to discard. It's just a simple process. And we understand that on the basis of the results we get. We get much better results when we are attending to our minds in that healthy way. And we don't get the results we seek at all when we don't do that. We end up being, having anger and having all these other things going on, right? Okay. So let's go back to finish this off with the fifth one, which is the knowledge. It's called here knowledge, intelligence. It's even called wisdom. Oftentimes we talk about wisdom being virtuous in and of itself, but you can have, as we're going to see later in this course, afflicted wisdom, meaning you're kind of not knowing things in a correct way. You have some knowing of them and some awareness of them, but you're not there yet. You're deceiving yourself in regard to certain things. So knowledge or intelligence, he says, is the mental factor that examines the qualities of the object with fine analysis. It functions to remove doubt, to maintain the mind in virtue, and to see hidden phenomena through insight, those things that we are not aware of, such as the true nature of reality, which we'll talk about later in this course. Through our insight, through our ability to actually discern that by investigating it. It can be innate from past lives. We do have some wisdom we bring forward from our past lives, or it can even be acquired through the three activities that we often talk about as the three ways of attaining wisdom or knowledge. Listening, which is through our ears, but also when we read texts, what have you. Analyzing, the second level of wisdom, when we think about or contemplate the teachings that we've received. And then meditating, when we actually single-pointedly focus on that subject and bring it deeper into our minds. This is where he talks about this one intelligence in particular being correlated with unwholesome pursuits. And I think it's worth reading because, again, we could see that all of the other ones would fall into place then, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But he says here, this is from Geshe Rapton. His book is on your book list that's out at the website as well, but it's kind of hard to find, and it's a little more technical, but I like some of what Geshe Rapton says. He says, intelligence or knowledge can be applied in unwholesome as well as wholesome pursuits. It has enabled people to construct highly complex weapons of destruction on the one hand, and codes of ethical conduct on the other. But by far the most important role it plays is that of discerning the nature of ultimate truth, selflessness, this, what I mentioned just a short while ago, the final mode of reality. Both for the inference as well as for the immediate perception of selflessness. We talked about this last week about how we move away from our wrong awareness all the way to a direct perception, a direct understanding of emptiness, selflessness. So both for that, the inference as well as the immediate direct perception of selflessness, a keen intelligence is the vital factor in reaching a comprehension. Nevertheless, without being mounted upon the firm concentration of mental quiescence, it alone lacks any power to cause one to progress along the path to liberation. You have to integrate that wisdom more deeply through what's called here mental quiescence. It's the concentration that we just looked at, the previous factor, brought to a very stable, deep level. So similarly, mental quiescence and the various other levels of concentration also lack any liberating power by themselves alone. Thus, it is essential to combine the firm concentration of mental quiescence with the intelligent recognition of penetrative insight. And that's just what we always talk about in terms of, the necessity of having those two factors present. You cannot go deeply into the mind without it being single-pointedly focused. But you have to do that with this wisdom that you develop through your deeper investigation of the nature of things. So again, all of this has been presented in the context of a more wholesome state of mind. But as was pointed out, we can go through an equal process on the unwholesome side. I mean, most of you saw the film Oppenheimer, right? About development of the atomic bomb not so far from here, right? Here in New Mexico. And so that was obviously an investigation into creating what Venerable Gyatso was talking about, right? A weapon of mass destruction that was horrific, when the bombs were dropped in Japan, right? The two that were dropped there. It's like, that is just unbelievable destruction that we can cause through our wisdom. That wisdom was a result of someone having a concentrated mind, examining the whole thing of how do we, cause an atomic bomb to do the damage that it would through, breaking that through atomic fusion, isn't it? Or fission? I don't remember which one. I'm not a scientist. But anyway, that whole process, and of course that came about through having some mindfulness that was, directed to stay with that whole process and investigate that to take it to the end, which was also having some sort of conviction that was based on an aspiration, the aspiration being extremely unwholesome, right? To want to, well, I'm not saying extremely unwholesome. Everything is mixed to some degree, right? When we wanted to have the war end and we wanted to, have not so much loss of life, but in the process created this horrific thing that we're still living with, right? This bomb that now exists in so many nations and can be the end of humanity as we know it, depending upon how it's used, right? So any of those sorts of pursuits that move in a particular direction can have their own process with those five, where those five can be introduced, and we have a level of aspiration that feeds our conviction, that feeds our mindfulness and our concentration, and then some level of wisdom that can still end up being afflicted. not so helpful. But we're doing this in regard to everything we do. When we purchase a new device, when they introduced the iPad and the iPhone and all these various things, we were also having a similar aspiration to have that in our lives and a conviction that this is what we believe will be some improvement on our lives and what have you. And then, a mindful, concentrated awareness of it. And then the wisdom that thinks, I've got this object now that's going to help me and whatever. I mean, it's happening in kind of subtler levels with regard to those sorts of things, but it's still there. It's how we are going about, again, taking a deeper interest in the various things in our world. That's why we call it, again, this focusing mental factors or object ascertaining, meaning we're getting at the deeper qualities that we are perceiving in that object. And we're not saying those objects are embedded within it and inherently there. We're saying these are how we are seeing them. That's why, once more, our conceptual mind can come up with a lot of objects or a lot of qualities in regard to objects that are not necessarily there, or that are things that have been overlaid. Look at what we do in advertising all these things, right? You imbue them with all kinds of qualities and say how delicious and delightful and wonderful, and you'll never have, your life will be totally changed if you get this or buy that. I mean, these are all conceptions you're throwing on top of these things, right? So it happens again on that side where we're just part of a chain of continual desire and, frustration and whatever. And it's also happening when we sit down and do this type of work and examine the Buddhist teachings and come to understand how we can work with our minds and deepen our understanding and so on. So I hope you gain some appreciation for them. As I said, I didn't want to spend tons and tons of time on them because I think that, again, they are more functional in nature and not necessarily as important as kind of what we need to be doing in the work. Let me just read this one little slide. I'm going to skip over the ones that are the descriptions from His Holiness and Venerable Children of these 5 that we just went through, because I think it'll reiterate it, but I think we want to kind of keep this moving in a direction towards working with attachment. So this quote, though, from Geshe Tashi says, if the first group, those first 5 that we looked at, are like the engine or the sort of mechanics of the mind, this group is what really shapes the mind's experience. These mental factors, again, the ones we just looked at, they ascertain the object of the main mind, taking the clay of raw sense data and molding it into the finished sculpture. How close the ascertained object is to reality depends on how deluded or enlightened the ascertaining mind is. So once more, don't think that because these 5 were presented, and as I said, in these slides that are here from Venerable Children and the Dalai Lama, they also talk about them from a positive point of view. But don't think that that makes them necessarily all positive, because they can arise with these unwholesome states of mind as well. So what I'd like to do now, those are, again, the 10 that play these roles in terms of shaping our experience and giving us a deeper appreciation for our experience, a deeper ascertainment of our experience. And that can be, again, wholesome or unwholesome. What we're going to move into now, and the way that I'm going to be presenting each of these, is I want to start with what are called the 6 root afflictions. And I need to start by talking about what we mean by that word affliction. This is one of the main things we want to focus on in this getting to know our minds. We want to be aware of these, kind of, as Venerable Robina says, our crazy roommates, the ones that are kind of making our life more difficult, because when they take over and we start following them, we get into trouble. We end up doing things that are not so beneficial for us. Through the force of that intention moving us in that direction and these other things coming in and flavoring it, we create unwholesome karma. We create the karma to experience suffering and difficulty in our lives. And we often create suffering and difficulty for others in the moment that we are following those states of mind. So that's the whole point behind examining these. And so there are 2 sets. Let me go ahead and put on the screen this other handout that I haven't talked about so much, that is the full chart of these 51 mental factors. We just went through the first 5, the second set of 5. We're going to come back and talk about the virtuous ones as they apply as antidotes to some of the afflicted ones. So don't worry, we'll cover all 11 of those, but we're going to see them coming into play later. The 6 root afflictions are the ones on the screen, the first 5 delineated there at the bottom of that first page and then the top of the second page, what are called afflicted views. And we'll go into those in more detail further down the road. I want to spend tonight moving into the very first of these in this presentation, what's called attachment or desire, attraction. And then we'll move on and spend a fair amount of time on these first few because they're called root afflictions because all the other afflictions, what are in this next category, the 20 close afflictions, and you'll see that there are a whole list of these guys and 20 of them, they have they're derived from the main 3, in particular, what are often called the 3 poisons. They're derived from attachment, anger, or ignorance and confusion, sometimes a combination of those. So that's the importance of kind of looking at these, is that these are the things we really want to be aware of. These are the problematic states of mind. And again, there's not, in contrasting this with Western psychology and my understanding, which is not perfect, and if any of you are psychologists or in that whole field of Western psychology, I'm not in any way insulting that discipline because it's extremely useful for many people to contend with the challenges in their mental health and to accentuate more positive emotions and so on. But most psychologists, as far as my awareness is, if you go to them and you say, my anger is an absolute problem and I want to be rid of it once and for all, they will look at you and say, well, your anger does serve some purpose. And they think there's a healthy component to anger, that anger, and again, I'm not saying that there is some forms of anger that certainly when we are putting our energy into trying to change things for the betterment of all and trying to create a better world and what have you. His Holiness even says that that's what he would consider to be a righteous anger of some sort. That's not what we're talking about here, that we're talking about an anger that is one of these afflictions. It's our second one on the list. If you go into a Western psychologist and say, I want to be rid of my anger, they'll say, well, I can help you get your anger under control of it so that it's not quite so, full of rage and, causing problems for you and others around you. But, I think you have a healthy level of anger that you need to sustain because you need to have it as just a way of being a functioning human being in this world. Buddhism would say, no, all of those that we consider a delusion, not this righteous anger that causes you to go out and protest and do whatever. That's a good way to channel that and to say, yes, I want things changed. I want there to be a better world. But the anger that is what we're going to be discussing as this delusional state of mind is something that we need to get rid of because it's going to keep causing us problems, even when it's at a lower level, even when it's only being expressed in ways that are, not physically harmful to others or verbally harmful to others. Okay. So that's my understanding as we get into what we call these afflictions. Maybe just before we get to one more comment on this, this word affliction speaks to the fact that these sort of do afflict the mind at some level. They cause some sort of suffering by being in the mind. But that's not always that evident. With attachment that we're going to talk about in a moment, attachment almost seems to be something that helps us to get what we want, right? Because, I'm attached to that, I want that. It seems to be actually not causing our mind to be disturbed in any way or suffer in any way. It's helping us to get what it is that will bring pleasure to this mind. So we have to be aware that this idea of affliction is more like it's taking the mind out of its normally, or what is its true state of being completely calm and centered and focused. When we have a mind of attachment that starts grasping at those pleasurable things, or a mind of anger that starts pushing away the undesirable things, both of those are states of agitation. Both of those are not causing the mind to be at peace. So again, that's one reason why we use this word affliction. Sometimes they'll be referred to as disturbing emotions or destructive emotions, because there is that element to them as well, as I just discussed. Sometimes they're called delusions. Why are they called delusions? Because they aren't actually seeing things correctly. This is what is another way that we have to understand, is that there is a misconception going on in regard to every time we have one of these present. Something is not being looked at in reality. At the very deep level, in terms of how things exist in that ultimate truth level that was just being talked about, but even in the conventional level, where we are distorting the beauty of something that we find desirable, or the ugliness of something we find repulsive. All of that is going on. So there's different names for these, but these are the disturbing factors that the Buddha identified, and he said these are the real problem. And of course, the one that is at the root of all of it is the third one, this one that we call ignorance or confusion, and specific form of ignorance. There are many forms of ignorance we have in our minds. So let's go into this whole category of the afflictions. This is just a little bit of what Geshe Rabten shares in his book. He says, now we shall consider the afflictions. These are the mental factors of the mind that, since they are responsible for every form of suffering and discontent we experience, are regarded as unwholesome. He uses this word unwholesome. And I just want to make sure that that's why I've got this little footnote to it. It says, note that unwholesome here does not necessarily mean non-virtuous. Sometimes we equate those two. I'll get to delineating this a bit more as we go through this, but he says this, my note says here, this is because there are afflictions such as the ignorance of the nature of reality, and this one we're going to call the view of the transitory group or collection. It's among the 5 afflicted views that I just mentioned briefly a few minutes ago. Those can also arise with virtuous mental factors. What this is saying is that, remember that slide I showed you in first class of the tree of samsara? The root of the tree is ignorance. Whether we have a virtuous state of mind or a non-virtuous state of mind arising, as long as it's in the root of ignorance, it's going to still bring about results in samsara. But we can have virtuous states of mind that arise with ignorance. Most of us do. And I mean, beings are going about engaging in a lot of virtue in this world. People who are feeding those who are hungry and caring for those who are ill and what have you, and doing that out of their genuine compassion, they still are rooted in that ignorance. So when we call these unwholesome, Geshe Rabten calls them unwholesome, don't think that that means that they're necessarily non-virtuous in the moment, because ignorance can arise with the virtuous states of mind. Okay, just making that delineation, because we start throwing around these words and we start equating them. Oh, over here we have wholesome, virtuous, constructive, beneficial. Over here we have unwholesome, destructive, the non-virtuous, all of that, or I'm sorry, yeah. Did I do it the right way? Okay. Anyway, so the idea is that we can't make all those necessarily equivalent depending upon who's teaching. In this case, Geshe Rabten was teaching and calling those, afflictions unwholesome states of mind. So anyway, we'll get to that. I just wanted to make that point before we go too far down the road. The afflictions are characterized by being conceptual mental factors that, upon arising in the mind, cause disturbance and unrest. In the case of gross attachment, hatred, and so forth, this disturbing nature is quite evident. I mean, look at people who have gross attachment, we might refer to in some cases as being like addiction. If you have somebody who is addicted to a chemical substance and is really disturbed at not having it in their bodies and what have you in their mind, is totally craving that all the time, we can see how disturbed that mind is. But the attachment that we have in our everyday life that's like, oh, I think I'll pick that up for myself. And oh, I'll get that. And that looks delicious. That's delightful. I mean, there's a tendency, we don't see the disturbing nature of that quite so much. And certainly even some of our minor annoyances we have with things, we don't see it as disturbing our minds that greatly. But when we have full-fledged rage, then we can see we're red in the face and our eyes are bulging. And yeah, it's disturbing then for sure. Just one second, Mary Jo. Let me go back to the slide and finish off this bit, and then we'll see what your comment is. But we may wonder how such afflictions as laziness or dullness disturb the mind. We'll get to those when we talk about them. Those are subtler things that do cause us not to have the mind in the more ideal state. Buddhism, once more, is trying to help us to find that place where the mind is not going to be kind of moved in directions that are contrary to this kind of genuine or more beneficial state of the mind that we all can achieve. That's why, once more, the idea of developing concentration, meditation, and so on, laziness and dullness are distractions to doing that. So they don't allow us to actually incorporate these deeper principles into our minds and generate the more ideal states of mind. So in that way, they are disturbing or taking us kind of off track. They're much subtler, but just know that there's a range of this. When we call them disturbing emotions or refer to afflictions as having that nature, some of them do in a much grosser way, but many of them, it's much subtler. Yeah, Mary Jo, if you want to unmute and share your comment or question.
Well, back to the tree image, I was wondering, are the roots always unwholesome? Are
Well,
they
again,
always of ignorance?
Well, again, if we use this unwholesome to refer to all of the afflictions, then it's always going to be the root of ignorance that's behind all of our samsaric actions. That can be uprooted. That can be, you can be removed from the tree of samsara by uprooting the tree and uprooting your ignorance. But that's why I find when he uses this word unwholesome, it gets to make it sound like it's non-virtuous. And that was kind of the point of that slide, is that not everything that arises from ignorance is non-virtuous. It is going to be distorting reality. It's not going to be seeing things correctly. Because again, that deeper error that we'll get to eventually, we'll just hang on, those of you who are new to these teachings, just know that that is something that is involved in so many of our thoughts and actions. It's the root from which all of this conditioned existence that we're involved in, going from life to life, having this generally unsatisfactory experience, it's all arising from that ignorance. But we have some experiences that arise on the basis of good karma we created through wholesome states of mind, of generosity and kindness and compassion. And those are still rooted in ignorance, but they're going to give us nicer results in samsara. We're all experiencing that right now by being here in a human form, listening to Dharma teachings, engaging in all of this, trying to improve our minds. This is good karma ripening for you that you created, nonetheless, through your mind that's rooted in ignorance. It can be removed from that ignorance and can be brought to an amazing culmination of the state of Buddhahood. But all of the the non-virtuous stuff is also rooted in that ignorance. Once we uproot that ignorance, of course, all of that falls away and is gone. We never have to experience those non-virtuous states of mind or the karma we've created or the suffering results that arise from that again. So all of that, again, is a way of differentiating this. But the root itself of ignorance is, we often say it's technically neutral. It doesn't have the ability to be positive or negative on its own. It depends upon what other thoughts are introduced on the basis of that. It is problematic, though. Don't get me wrong. It's the root of all of our difficulties. But it is not in and of itself non-virtuous or virtuous. It will be flavored by whatever we arise in the mind in conjunction with that. That word concomitant with that. Okay, Mary Jo?
Yeah, sort of like what we cultivate, right? What we're cultivating is important.
Mhm. Absolutely. So this is where,
Thank
while we are with the root of ignorance, while that is our root, we want to pay more attention to the more positive side of things, generating the more wholesome states of mind. And we're going to focus on those, as I said, the virtuous mental factors as we go through this. The ones that particularly are the counterforce, the antidote to the non-virtuous states of mind. And then, of course, that'll get us some good results while we're in samsara, because we won't be following all the negative states of mind so much. We'll be following those that are positive and have greater benefit in the long term. But in order for us to be free of this whole thing, we have to uproot that ignorance. There's no way you can do it without that. All right. We're almost done with our
Thank
time.
you.
Sure. Let me just introduce you to attachment a little bit so that we have some understanding of this state of mind. I know there's a few slides, I think, before even getting into that. They're classified into, we already talked about this, the two groups, the 6 root and then the 20 that are secondary. Okay. Attachment. This is the more kind of technical definition to some degree by the Dalai Lama and Venerable Chodron. Sometimes this is called desire. Sometimes more heightened forms of it are called craving, grasping. This arises based on projecting or exaggerating the attractiveness of an object within cyclic existence, what we again call this the tree of samsara. Samsara is cyclic existence. It's the people, things, ideas, places, and so forth, all these various objects that we experience. It wishes for, takes a strong interest in, and clings to that object. This is the nature of attachment or desire. when the Buddha taught that first teaching, the Four Noble Truths that we went through in the earliest class, the first class, when he was teaching on the second noble truth, what is the cause of being in samsara and having these, excuse me, unsatisfactory experiences, he highlighted this mental factor. He said it's due to craving, it's due to grasping. Why? Because it is our default mode. This is how we come into, that's why this is called the desire realm. The human existence is part of the desire realm because it's filled with all of this stuff that we naturally are trying to find what will bring us happiness and pleasure. Venerable Rabina, when she teaches on this, she says, we're like junkies born into a world of junk. Like everything is junk for us, something to help us with kind of calming our addiction, giving us what we want. This is our kind of default search mode. And it's even there in animals. And look at animals. I mean, animals are always obsessed with finding what is pleasurable, what is delightful, where's the food, where's this, where's that. That is their way of kind of trying to find the happiness that they desire. Remember that the Buddha said that everything starts from this fundamental wish or desire that we have, which is to find happiness and to avoid suffering. And the Buddha said nothing wrong with that. He's not saying that's problematic or faulty. Everything he taught is to resolve that dilemma of how do we find happiness? How do we avoid suffering? The problem is that we have been investing in these means of attaining happiness and avoiding suffering, which is grasping all those pleasurable, delightful, delicious things and keep wanting more and more and more of them and never wanting to let go of that experience. And anytime something comes in that interferes with that, that is thwarting our attachment from getting what it wants, well, then we do all the pushing away and the yelling and the screaming and the punching and whatever to get that out of our lives. These are the two things we vacillate back and forth between every day of our lives. Waking up even like, what do I want for breakfast? She's going to take that. I mean, and again, I'm not saying every level of this is faulty. This basic desire for happiness, there's not a problem. It's just that when we go about kind of feeding our desire for happiness with just creating more and more craving, we're not doing ourselves any favors. We're just going to simply create patterns that cause us to have problems in the future. So this is something we're going to investigate more. I don't want to go too far with our, time of trying to end on time here and what have you. What I'd like to do, though, before we leave tonight is at least, we'll go into this in more detail. I just wanted to spend a little time on attachment tonight, is to do, if you wish, one of these mindfulness exercises, and you can do more than one. I will put these presentation slides out on the drive. Again, the Google Drive is on the website for the center. You'll find it on that home page. There's a little place that says click here for the materials, whatever. It'll take you to the Google Drive and you can find the presentation slides there. This was the one that we talked about earlier, I think, but just with regard to the 5 focusing or object ascertaining, I talked about kind of picking that apart in terms of an experience. That's one that you may do. To what degree, even when you're eating your breakfast, is aspiration and conviction and all of those present. Then this other one is for attachment. And this is the one I'd maybe like you to work with a bit, but we're going to go into more detail on attachment and even talk about some of the secondary mental factors that arise on the basis of that. As you come into contact with objects that produce a pleasurable feeling, again, this is a pleasurable feeling for you. It may not for others, because that pleasure is your karma ripening in terms of that object inducing that feeling. Notice how the mistaken conception of attachment arises, particularly with regard to how it exaggerates the attractiveness of the object, how you embellish it with your own imagination. And also notice whether just having that awareness of the process of attachment arising can disrupt its development. Sometimes if we become get the meta awareness where we're able to be aware of our awareness, the awareness doesn't keep doing what it's doing. It becomes dismantled to some degree. But this is an important part of it. I haven't touched on it that much. We'll go into more detail. It is exaggerating. All of these mental factors that are afflictions exaggerate things to some degree. They overlay on top of things a quality that is not there. Yes, that is a pleasurable thing that you're experiencing. There's a taste of pleasure when you put that chocolate cake or whatever on your tongue, but you are embellishing it, making it into so much more than what it is. All right, we'll talk about that more. So any questions or comments on what we're doing, because the rest of this from here on out is pretty much going through all these various, again, crazy roommates and what have you. And one of the roommates, we want to make sure their voices are heard and they take over and have more say in what we do versus those that we want to diminish and eventually eliminate. Anyone? Okay.
Do you get into like ego mind identification?
Uh-huh. Yeah, and this phrase of ego mind, I mean, there is again, as we know, ego came out of the Western psychology and is not as point for point delineate or kind of identical with what we're talking about here in terms of the Buddhist problem. The Buddhist problem, that ignorance that we're talking about, they often call it ego grasping or kind of an ego clinging. And the idea being that when we inflate a sense of self, an I that is not there, that we are going to, that's where the whole process starts, is that we cling to this strong sense of me, and then we do everything we can to protect that me and to get what that me wants and avoid what it doesn't want. And we're doing that on the basis of something that doesn't exist at all. So it's a little bit different than the way ego is used in Western psychology on the basis of my own, again, meager understanding. I don't claim to be an expert on it, but I think there are some differentiations in terms of what we mean by that. But what you're alluding to, I think, is that kind of ego grasping or self grasping that Buddhists say is sort of at the heart of all of our problems. And we'll get into that more when we get to the third of these first set of afflictions, where we look at ignorance, and specifically that form of ignorance that is really tightly, grasping at this sense of me being here, and being here in a real concrete way that necessitates these sorts of reactions to what's going on in my world. Because when we're coming from that basis, we're coming on the basis of something that doesn't actually exist. And we'll go into that detail. Yes, Beverly.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask when you said it. So basically all this is going to take us to understanding that this is, I call it 3D reality. I don't know, but in other words, it's not Maya, or I don't know the word.
Maya,
I'm new to Buddhism, but
Yeah.
so getting us to detach from that in order to understand that everything that is good and peaceful and helping removing those obstacles is, I mean, is that where this is all going?
Absolutely. I think
Okay.
your words are pointing in the right direction.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Because I'm having a hard time with all the
Yeah.
definitions. My
I
mind
know,
sees-
and that's where the subtitle I just was a practical approach to Buddhist psychology. I don't want to make it too philosophical, and a lot of these words. One of the biggest problems I have to admit, and maybe I shouldn't introduce so many different texts, is that almost every text has a different English equivalent for these various things, and so it becomes complicated. Well, what do you mean by attachment? And then over here it's desire, and over here it's craving, and we're going to try to
Thank you.
peel back some of that. I'm sorry if I get too much into some of that with my presentation, but what we're really about, as you're saying, is that we need to see that initially where we can begin to have our greatest impact is by understanding the mechanism by which we get involved in these various things. And it comes down to this sort of bipolar thing going on, all the wonderful stuff that I just can't get enough of and keep pulling into my life with stronger and stronger attachment, more and more addictive patterns in a sense, even though we're not technically addicts in our Western perception. And on the other hand, all the horrible, awful stuff that I just keep reacting to in very negative ways that cause me to be angry and upset and frustrated and resentful and all the various things that arise on the basis of that. And begin to pull that back into understanding the mechanism for that is to work on our minds to not engage in those exaggerations and all of the thought processes that feed that. And then we eventually do the deeper work where we go, and all of this is, we get caught up in it because we're clinging so tightly to this real I. That's how Rinpoche would always refer to it. Lama Zopa, he would say, we were clinging to a real I, which doesn't exist in reality. So yeah. So keep working with this. This is tough stuff, but this is our job. Venerable Rabina, another quote from her. She's one of my teachers, and many of you know her. She's really quite wonderful and I steal things from her all the time. So she said this was somebody else's quote, but it sounds so much like her that I don't know. I had a hard time believing it was someone else. She said, being a good Buddhist doesn't mean that you're sort of sitting there all peaceful, serene, nothing going on. She says, being a good Buddhist means having your hands in your own shit.
Oh.
So I'm giving that kind of not as a warning, but as a just, this is what we're doing. This is what Buddhism is about, is to see our shit, to see our stuff, to see these states of mind are problematic. They're not producing the results we seek. I mean, if they were doing it, well, then fine, keep investing in it, but they don't do it. That mind of attachment just keeps grasping at more and more and more and never is satisfied. And the mind of aversion can keep pushing things away, but things keep coming back, and it just keeps getting stronger and stronger to where we end up with, full-fledged rage as opposed to just, minor irritation. This is the nature of our minds because we follow those states of mind. We can do something different. So being a good Buddhist means working with that stuff, working with that. Who wants to work with it? It's tough stuff. So, but I'll keep being the cheerleader and help you all to do it as best as you can. So, all right, we should conclude tonight. We have a prayer list, dedication list that Jana will read. And if you have additional names that you'd like to add for either obstacles, illness, or those who have died or are dying at this time, died recently, then you can add those either in the chat box if you're on Zoom or here in the Gompa, you can say them, and certainly you can say them as well on Zoom. So, Jana?
We dedicate the merit created by listening to this teaching to all sentient beings everywhere. On every prayer list, we dedicate for the health and long lives of all our precious teachers. We dedicate for all those beings experiencing obstacles, specifically Wyatt, Adrian, Stella, Jana, Marie, Tony, Mary Jo, Rolf, Elohim, Aiden, Ed Gillespie, Yvonne, Alyssa, Kennedy, and Lisa. For all those experiencing illness, specifically Jane, Mary Jo, Maria, Libby S, Lou, Bonte P, Kelly, John, Nikki, Cecil, Bill, John, Rolf, the venerable monk who lost his leg, venerable Dom Fo Masan, and Aloka recovering, for Lou, Mary, and Roman, and for those who have died in the last 49 days or who are in the process of dying, Renee Good, Sandra Jackson, Eric, Nate Selby, Alex Pretty, the skunk, Ben, and Peppa the dog.
Are there any other names to be added? Mary Jo?
Yes, please add to the died, the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Any other names? Okay, thank you, Jana, for reading those. Let's do our dedication prayers to conclude tonight. Just a few prayers tonight. Let me scroll down there. All right. Jana will lead us in those.
Dedication prayers, one time in English. Due to the merit of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state
of a Guru Buddha,
may all living beings
without exception,
into that
enlightened
may
state,
the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen
rise,
and that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more.
And then we'll just do the prayer for His Holiness and then make mental dedications for Rinpoche. I think it's a little late. So
long life prayer for His Holiness Dalai Lama, the wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled.
then we also add dedications for Rinpoche's reincarnation to be swiftly identified and for everything to be auspicious for that being to be of incredible benefit to us and all beings. So again, just to remind everybody, we're in this period called the Days of Miracles. Yesterday was Losar, the first day of the new year. And so as the moon waxes to the full moon on March 3rd, it's a very auspicious period for practice. So March 3rd in particular is the first full moon day of the year. So you can do some additional practice that day. keep in mind that we're going to have a little bit of an interruption in the schedule here. Next Thursday, I'm going to California on Friday for a teaching tour. So I've cleared my schedule next week to teach on Thursday night. And I think the following Thursday night, correct? Which is March 5th, I think. Those will be Zoom only from California. So were you going to do anything here with a gathering for people to watch it together, or
We
just
can, I mean, I can be.
if there's interest? I think it's nice to come together and.
I think so. I like.
Okay,
I'll be here next Thursday. then.
okay.
Okay.
So it'll be February 26th, next Thursday. March 5th is the following one. And then there won't be one for 2 more weeks. You'll have 2 Thursdays after that where there won't be a meeting at all. Nothing in Zoom unless you do something else. And that may be for Eloise and John and what have you, the board to decide. But if you might show video or film something at that time, anyway, that'll be just, you'll hear about it. Then I'll be back here on March 26th in person. And I plan to be here in person for a while, but we'll see. I've got jury duty in Santa Fe for 3 months over the summer. So. But we haven't even discussed the summer program, so I'm not even sure what's all happening. Keep your prayers also for Chart Lama Rinpoche, who is hopefully coming to Santa Fe as a resident teacher and will be coming up here to teach. So if we make prayers for him to be here, then you'll have another teacher that you can rely upon in New Mexico to be coming up here and providing teaching. So, all right. Thank you, everyone. Sorry to keep you late. Bye, everyone online. Good to see you. Bye, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.
Safe travels.
Bye.
Thanks.
Will you be here next